All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to those online and in person. How many of you, by show of hands, either online or here in the um, room, this is your first ever Campo meeting, event, whatever it is? How many of you here in person, this is your first time here at Campo? Okay, good. Well, welcome. For those of you here in person, just a couple of quick things. We're here in Suite 201 on the second floor of 1 Fenton, Maine. The bathrooms are just out in the hallway to the left there if you need to use that at any point. If there's any sort of emergency, obviously there's alarms and things. There's a fire extinguisher back in the back corner if we were to need that for something. There are a variety of ways to get out of here, right? The quickest way for us is going to be out the main door, which is to the left once you leave this room. And then between here and the elevators, there are about 75 stairways that you can get out if you need to. I'm amazed at how many stairways we have in this building. And of course, if you're in the parking deck, we can always go to the parking deck. We do have a muster point out here, outside the building, off to the corner there by the street sign, on the other, to the left of the, parking garage. And we'll have staff that'll be able to direct you there. If for some reason we can't go out our main door, we'll go to the right, through the boardroom, through the, staff room and kitchen, and down the stairway on that end of the building. Any questions about any of that? All right, great. For those of you online, you don't have to worry about any of that. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Chris Lucasina. I'm the executive director here at Campo. There are a lot of us here, and I think that, did we do introductions on here? I don't think we did.
Yeah.
Oh, in a minute we do? Okay, well, then I'll wait until that. We will have some Q&A breaks here in the presentation. We also have a couple of different staff that will be presenting. Realizing now that we didn't update the slide here, Alex and Shelby will not be doing any presenting today. You're going to be stuck with me for their parts. But you will get broken up from my mundane voice by Bonnie Parker, who will be doing some of the presentation as well. The meeting is recorded. And for those in the room, you can see there's a big sort of microphone here in the ceiling. If the light is green, we are not muted and we are live. If it is red, that means we're muted. But either way, the meeting is being recorded. For those of you online, please use the chat function for any questions or comments. I know it has a Q&A option on there, but we're not using that today. We'll just use the chat function. And just so you know, everyone in the room will be able to see whatever you type in there because it's up on the big screen here. So let's go ahead and do introductions here in the room. And Daniel, you can start us off.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Spruill. I'm a senior transportation planner here at Campo.
Good morning. My name is Hepatel. I'm with the City of Raleigh Transportation and Transit. I hope to learn today just more about the Metropolitan Transportation planning process and the alternatives scenarios.
And Head also serves as one of Go Raleigh's TCC members. So we'll talk about that. The TCC is the Technical Coordinating Committee. It's the staff level committee that meets monthly. So if you are on the TCC or you're an alternate, please make sure you let us know that as well.
Good morning, everyone. Gabriel Wilkins, transit planner with the City of Raleigh as well, working with HET on the bus rapid transit.
Hi, I'm Joseph Linsky with the Town of Garner, and I do current planning.
Thomas Waltersdorf, Town of Garner, do planning, zoning, and land use.
Morning, I'm Erin Joseph. I'm also with the Town of Garner, and I'm also a TCC alternate.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jacob Irving. I'm a transportation planner here at Campo.
Good morning, Kenneth Ritchie, Assistant Transportation Director of the City of Raleigh, and I am the TCC Vice Chair.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Bonnie Parker, Campo's communications and public engagement stuff. So for some of you get lots of emails from me. That's really it. Oh, I do want to say, I've already said this to a few of you. There are no dumb questions. That's the whole reason we're doing this training today. Please bring the dumb, bring the technical. We'll do it all. Hey, who you are?
Sure. Neil Perry with the NCDOT Rail Division.
Good morning, Don Mile, Wake County Commissioner.
Colton Young, Franklin County Senior Planner.
Chris Garcia, the Town of Holly Springs Transportation Planner, and I'm on the TCC.
Emma Lynn, Town of Wake Forest, long range planner, and I'm also on the TCC.
Shannon Poole, Town of Clayton, Engineering Department, Project Control Specialist, TCC alternate.
Tanner Hazlett, Town of Roseville. I'm taking over for Austin Kiefer, PCC member.
Great. We have several folks online. Do you see one that's on hold on there? I'm just curious what that means. Oh, never mind. It's off now. So you all can see each other online and we can see you all online, but in the interest of time and a lack of melee, we're just gonna go ahead and say welcome to everyone online and continue on. So today, you're gonna be with us for a couple hours this morning. I think the last couple times we've done this, it's lasted about 2.5 hours maybe. But some of that's dependent on conversation and questions and things like that. So hopefully you'll get a better understanding of what the Metropolitan Transportation Plan is, how we develop it, who's involved. Many of you or your counterparts in your jurisdictions are involved. Why it's important to you and what your community's role is in the plan itself. And the development of the plan. But before we get into the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, since I know we have some new folks that are totally new to Campo, just want to cover a couple of basic things. What is an MPO? An MPO is a regional transportation planning and policy making organization. It was created under federal law. It's made up of representatives from local government, as well as other governmental transportation related agencies. So things like the Regional Transit Authority, Go Triangle is involved, RDU, our airport is involved, and then also state and federal partners in transportation as well. And we're charged with conducting what's known as the 3C planning process. So the continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive transportation planning process. And like everything else out there in transportation, there is a very, very long and specific definition of those three words. And they don't necessarily mean what you think they mean if you look them up or what they mean in the Webster's Dictionary. But if you ever want to have a lot of fun, go into Federal Register and look up 3C process and you'll see pages and pages of really tiny text explaining all of that. But generally, it means we're going to work together, we're going to talk to each other, and we're going to try and do things collectively. All right, so MPOs have 5 core functions. One is to establish a fair and impartial setting, and we do that primarily through our monthly meetings, and as well as a lot of other special meetings that we have on various topics throughout the year, depending on what's going on. We evaluate transportation alternatives. So we look at what alternate futures might look like if we make different choices. We develop and maintain a regional transportation plan known as the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. That's what you all are here to learn more about today. We also develop and maintain the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. How many of you have heard the TIP talked about by somebody who works at NCDOT, or the State Department of Transportation? Great. So in a moment, we'll explain why that is not actually what the TIP is and how all that works. And then we also are charged with involving the public. So in particular, residents of our region, stakeholders of our region, and those key subgroups from the public that are going to be affected by decisions made in the transportation realm. So a little bit more about our primary responsibilities. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan is the region's long-range transportation plan. It has to cover at least 20 years of time. In our case, we go out closer to 30 years. We update this plan every 4 years. So it is a living, breathing document. It is not something that we do and go put on the shelf. It is constantly being maintained. And the day after it's adopted, we begin the update cycle for the next major update. The Transportation Improvement Program, this is essentially the transportation-focused capital improvement program you might be used to at your local jurisdiction. So it's a list of all the projects that are going to be funded within a certain time frame. In particular, it identifies what the funding sources are, when the funds and how much funds are going to be used on a project. And it is required to be consistent with our MTP. So we adopt our regional plan. We then adopt a TIP. And in order for a project to be fundable and be able to be put into the TIP, that project has to be in our regional plan, our MTP. That's a really important concept to understand, right? It's one before the other, not the other way around. And then we also are required and responsible for ensuring that our transportation decisions will not further impact air quality in a negative way. And this is primarily done through what's called the conformity process. And we are thankfully at a point in the process where it's a much more straightforward process than it used to be. We still do technical analysis and the air quality modeling analysis that used to be absolutely required. But we continue to do that to make sure that we are not making decisions that take us backwards and we're continuing to either maintain or improve our air quality. So what is CAMPO? Besides a group of elected officials who get together once a month, we cover an area that accounts for about 13 or 14% of North Carolina's population. So CAMPO's boundaries include all of Wake County, the southern portions of Granville and Franklin counties, the eastern portions of Johnston, and the northern portions of Harnett County, and the most recent addition, the western portions of Johnston County. The most recent addition is the eastern portions of Chatham County. We don't go all the way to Pittsboro. We basically go to the western side of Lake Jordan and then down to the Moore County line and Lee County lines. So our MPO, sort of the structure of it, the executive board is the governing board for the MPO. It's the governing body. They make all the decisions unless they've delegated some authority, which they've done a little bit of that, but not much. We have a professional staff here, currently 24 staff members to maintain and ensure that we meet all of our requirements and do a good job of planning for our future. We have some folks here in this room that are either on the technical coordinating committee or are alternates. That group meets monthly and makes recommendations, generally in the technical realm, for the executive board. But again, the executive board is the entity that makes the decisions for the MPO. Want to be really clear here. An MPO is not a bicameral body, it's a unicameral body. The TCC, the staff, and any outside boards, local councils, commissions, whatever those are, they can, relative to decisions the MPO has to make, they can all advise and recommend things to the executive board, but ultimately the executive board has that authority and that responsibility to make those decisions. That makes sense to everybody? Okay, so now that we got all that out of the way, and there is a much longer, more in-depth MPO 101 if anyone is interested in that. Usually we hold that annually, and we usually hold it in February. But the weather and some other changes have kind of had us push that, and I think now we're maybe thinking about May or June to do it this year. So apologies for anybody who's been looking for that training. I know some people take it more than once, but we are still planning to do it later this year and then get back on track for an early calendar year one next year. But now diving into the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So the MTP is a long-range guide for major transportation investment decisions here in the region. It identifies transportation projects, policies, programs, strategies, or systems for our region over the lifespan of that particular plan. It emphasizes where we want to make our investments, and it does have an emphasis on existing systems. So we sort of have made the decisions in the past that we're going to focus on trying to improve the existing transportation network that we have rather than sort of ever expand it. So sort of maintain what you have before you expand further. Now, in reality, there's lots of expansion happening because of growth. But a lot of the funding decisions that are made through the MTP are focusing improvements on existing corridors rather than brand new corridors. We do develop our metropolitan transportation plan in concert with and try to integrate it with the local land use plans that are developed. We actually have a requirement that we need to be consistent with local land use plans. And then, of course, with our regional air quality strategies and other goals for our region. The plan does cover all transportation modes. So while a lot of times we are focusing on roadway, transit, bicycle and pedestrian, it does cover all modes. I don't think we actually cover ferries, but that's because we don't have any ferries in the region. If we did, it would have a chapter on ferry transportation or water transportation. And yes, for those MPOs that are in Florida, some of them actually cover space travel, believe it or not. That's probably a good point for me to just point out to everyone. MPOs are regional agencies, again, that are identified in federal law and required for any urbanized area of 50,000 people or more as defined by the US Census every 10 years. So currently there are about 430 MPOs across the entire country. The largest one is in New York City. It's called NIMTIC. And the smallest one, I think right now is one of the smallest ones and one of the newest ones is the Sandhills MPO down in Pinehurst in North Carolina. They just became an MPO last year. So every 10 years, if you're really interested in MPOs, you can watch what happens and maybe there'll be new ones or ones that combine. So this is not something that's unique to our area or unique to our state. It's happening all over the country. And we do a lot of work to coordinate across MPOs for development of our core functions and maintaining those core functions, and also try and innovate in what we're doing as well. And then the other thing that goes on with the MTP is pretty extensive public involvement. And we'll get into more of all of these things later in the workshop today, but that's sort of a really good high level takeaway. If you want, one set of bullet points of about what the MTP is, there you go. So we'll get into a little bit more here. Again, the planning horizon is at least 20 years. And depending on where we're at in our 4-year cycle, we're anywhere from 25 to even 30 years of planning horizon out there. So our currently adopted plan has a 2050 horizon year. And the update to that plan that we're working on right now goes out to 2055. So we'll go out 5 more years on that one. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan is fiscally constrained. It is not a wish list. We have to demonstrate that we will have a reasonable expectation of funding for the projects that are listed in that plan by those horizon years. A project has to be in the MTP if it's planned to have federal funding involved or some sort of other federal decision like a NEPA decision, environmental document decision, or if it's regionally significant. And there's a nice long definition of what regionally significant means. Generally, if it's anything above a collector street, that is going to be connecting to an activity center, or if there's public transportation, or if it's a freeway, or if it's going to be on the national highway system or things like that, it's a regionally significant project. I think this is a really good place to point out, especially for our current planners in the room. It doesn't matter who's funding the project. If it's regionally significant, it's got to be in the plan, right? So even if it's 100% funded by a developer and it's a 2-lane road that's going to be widened to 4 lanes, if it's functionally classified high enough, let's say it's a major collector street, we've got to have it in the plan, or the developer could run into issues down the road from NCDOT or from federal highways, even if they're in the middle of constructing the road. So this is I think a really good point that over the years, we probably haven't focused as much on as maybe we've needed to. So we're trying to do that a little bit more. And we're going through a process now with every local jurisdiction in Campo, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but to coordinate to make sure we have all of those future projects, at least sort of the full universe of what those future projects might be. We haven't gone through the steps to do fiscal constraint or to prioritize anything yet, but what is that full list of all the future projects in our region? We've been working with many of you and some of your coworkers to make sure we have that full, what we call the universe of projects, fully updated and ready to go for what's going to happen over the next 6 months. A couple other things about the MTP, our particular plan, we do it jointly with the Triangle West TPO, which is another MPO that covers the western third of the Triangle region. So Durham and Orange counties, as well as a little bit of northern Chatham counties. We work together with them to jointly develop the plan. It's actually one document, color coded, so you know if it's something that covers everybody or if it only applies to one MPO or the other. But ultimately, there are two separate adoptions, one by Campo for our stuff, one by the Triangle West TPO for their stuff. But we do work to make sure we're coordinating decisions that happen in the MTP. How many of you know someone that, or actually yourself, maybe lives in Johnston County or Wake County or Harnett County and travels to Durham County or vice versa? Raise your hand. Okay, good. And so, you know, the imaginary line that is the county line between Durham and Wake County, for example, it happens to be the MPO boundary between our two MPOs. Nobody really knows about that. Nobody really cares about that. You live where you live for the reasons that you live there, and you work where you work because that's where your office is, right? So we recognize that, and we try to work together to make sure we're making smart, coordinated decisions. Our current MTP, the 2050 MTP, was adopted in February of 2022. And again, that 2055 update is underway, and it absolutely has to be fully adopted and completed by February of 2026. So a lot's going to happen over the next 11 months. And already has been happening over the last 10 or 11 months, but a lot more coming throughout the rest of the calendar year. So how do we develop our MTP? We do it through a variety of things. First, we take all the local transportation plans, all the local comprehensive and land use plans, and we try and pull those together along with what we call special studies. So those are things that might cover a large area to coordinate between multiple jurisdictions. Things like our Southwest area study, Southeast area study, Northeast area study. If you think about that map of Campo, we kind of divide it up into quadrants and then work to do regional level planning and focus things in those areas and then pull it back out and kind of stitch all that together. We also have what we call hotspot studies. NCDOT might call those feasibility studies. So sometimes when we're looking at a transportation problem, a lot of times there's a readily apparent solution. Oh, we need to put a stop sign there, or we need to widen that road, or add sidewalk or something someplace. Other times it's a little trickier. What's really going on at this intersection? Why are there crashes? What's happening here? So these hotspots or feasibility studies are studies that will go in and spend a little more time, roll up our sleeves and try and figure out what's going on there and develop recommendations. Then we have a variety of other types of special studies that might be modal focused. So it might be a bicycle pedestrian study, it might be a transit study, or they're topic focused, like the regional freight plan or the regional intelligent transportation system study, those sorts of things. We take all those along with those local plans and we stitch those all together. Think of it like a patchwork quilt to develop the regional transportation plan. So our MTP at the regional level builds on all of the work that's been done by the local jurisdictions as well as by Campo through these other special studies to then be put into one big giant regional plan. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So a couple of examples. I happen to live in Apex, so I like to pick on them a lot and use them as examples. So the Apex Comprehensive Plan, That's where they're developing local transportation recommendations and setting the town's priorities. It's also where they're developing their land use assumptions. Both of those things are really important for us because we'll take all of your local land use assumptions for the future, put them into a forecasting tool and look and develop what a future population and employment looks like for our region based on those local land use plans. And then the local transportation recommendations and priorities, again, we pull those up to the regional level. We put them into what we call our universe of projects. And then we look at where everybody's priorities fit and how they fit together, right? Something that might be one community's number one priority, obviously may not be as important to another community, but something that is of very large importance, very big importance to the region might not be something that a local jurisdiction is generally thinking about. So that's where we've got to kind of balance across those things. And that's really what we're going to spend a lot of the rest of this calendar year doing. Another example for one of those regional special studies, the commuting corridor studies. This is almost dated, I think, but we'll have to update this in the future. But it is a good one. I like to point out as an example. It's something we did back in 2019. It was a technical analysis looking at our major commuting corridors. And it was an opportunity to say, what if we did a whole bunch of crazy things that we ordinarily don't think about doing? And what might that do for us? Will it help with improving transportation in our region in the future? And we got a lot of really good information out of that. It was things like, what if we did congestion pricing inside of 440? What if we tolled all the freeways? What if we doubled all the capacity of what was planned for all of our freeways? So at the time in our MTP, I-40 was planned to have 8 lanes in the future, so 4 lanes in each direction. We said, what if we put 8 lanes in each direction, so 16 lanes total? What would happen? I'll give you a hint. The congestion was still there, right? It was still there. So basically what that confirmed for folks was, and for our executive board was, we can go put as many lanes on any road as you want, and it will not solve congestion. We've got to look at a lot of other things. So adding capacity is probably always going to be part of the toolbox that we have to deal with transportation issues, but it's not the only thing and it won't solve all the problems. That was the main takeaway. All right. So I want to talk about one other thing, the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, or CTP. How many of you have heard of that before? How many of you for your local jurisdiction have a locally adopted transportation plan that you call the CTP? All right, great. Well, fun fact, in state law, your actual CTP is the region's CTP. Your local CTP is your local transportation plan. So when you look at general statutes and you see all the things about CTPs, if you look at the part about MPOs, if you're inside of an MPO, the MPO adopts the CTP for the region, which I always thought was curious. It's sort of as terminology changes over time, there's sort of this lag, and then everybody kind of modernizes their terminology for whatever it is. And CTP is one of those things where I think it might be a little confusing for folks, especially the public. But what a CTP actually is for our region, it is the vision plan. It is the unconstrained. So there's no requirement to show you're going to have a certain amount of money for the projects in your plan. It is multimodal still, but it goes beyond what you can afford in a certain time frame. So what we've done here in our region is we have one plan, right? We refer to it as the MTP, but technically it's the MTP and the CTP, right? So we have 30 years broken up in 10-year buckets called horizon years that are in the fiscally constrained, federally required metropolitan transportation plan. We then have another section of the plan that satisfies the state requirements for CTPs. And that we generally view that as something 30 to 50 years out. So there's more projects, other roads, other transit projects, other things like that are beyond that fiscally constrained window that we have for the MTP. Does everybody understand that, or have I lost anybody yet? Okay, good. So we've tried to make that simpler. There's one plan for the region, not two different documents that you have to keep updating. There's some other MPOs out there that do it the other way. And it gets very confusing because they might amend one plan and not the other, and then they're disconnected. So we try and keep that all together. Again, whether we're talking, for us, we tend to refer to it just as the MTP, but again, it does serve as the CTP as well. So kind of a way to visualize this a little bit for the visual learners out there. If you think about this in terms of the concentric circles here, the biggest, broadest level is that CTP. So we tend to think about that as going out about 30 to 50 years. There's no requirement for showing you have the money to do the things you want to do. Then, sort of shrinking the circle a little bit to about 30 years, we have our MTP, which is what we do have to show we have the funding for. And then we implement all of that through the smallest circle there, the blue one, the TIP, Transportation Improvement Program. And that goes out 10 years in time, but it's broken up into two sections, the first 5 years and the second 5 years. Another important thing to understand, in addition to the MTP and the TIP, is what's called the Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP. So that is that's essentially the work program for the MPO. Now, it does include what planning activities our transit agencies will be undertaking, but primarily and 90% of that document is dealing with what Campo is doing on a year-by-year basis. We update it annually. It functions as our budget and our to-do list. So this current fiscal year and half of next fiscal year, the majority of that UPWP is focused on updating our regional plan, that MTP document. Every other year, we're doing a TIP update, so that's in there as well. But if you did come across that term UPWP, or Unified Planning Work Program, we did want to make sure you understood, at least at a basic level, what that is. If you have more questions about that, please let us know. But the other important thing to point out, and why it's important for the MTP, whenever we're going to do one of those special studies that inform the regional plan, the MTP, we program it in that UPWP. And then that's how we show what we're going to be doing over the next year or so. So I'm going to get the name wrong, Bonnie, because they just changed it on me. But what we were calling the Northwest Area Study, I think we're calling it the Falls Lake Area Study now.
North Falls.
Yeah, North Falls.
North Falls Area Study, which will basically cover, if you were looking at that map of Campo, from about the 12 o'clock on the clock face over to, we'll call it 10 o'clock. So a lot of it is going to be northern and northwestern Wake County, and then all of Granville County that's in Campo, and actually going a little bit beyond that, because it made sense to look at some things outside of our boundary there. But that is programmed in our UPWP and our budget, and will be there this fiscal year, and it'll be there in next fiscal year as well. Okay, so how do we go through our MTP update? We have tried to develop a couple of things here to help you understand how we do this at a high level. First, we develop our vision and goals. We are not developing an MTP from scratch every 4 years. We're updating what we have. And so again, it's a living, breathing document. So, generally we are reviewing the vision and goals that we have and deciding if we need to make any adjustments every few years. We then go through and do a lot of analysis and evaluate alternatives. And that's sort of where we're at right now. Once we have done that, we get to a preferred option. And then ultimately we arrive at a final plan. And the real difference between the preferred option and the final plan is fiscal constraint, right? When we get to the preferred option, we're going to have way more stuff than what we can afford to do. So we're going to have to now right size it into what we can afford to do. So the preferred option, that's really when we know what our CTP is. And then once we apply fiscal constraint, we know what's in that MTP portion. We are required, and it is a good idea, to do performance-based planning. So we do have a variety of performance measures that align with the goals and objectives that we have for the region. And we set targets, and then we evaluate how we do on those, based on those targets for those performance measures. And we do constantly monitor that. Those of you on the TCC, you probably know that this month, the executive board is looking at adopting updated safety targets. Some of these targets and performance measures are required in federal law. Others we have developed that are unique to our region. So as we develop our MTP, we have a lot of partners. We have, as I said earlier, we have been working for many, many years with the MPO to our west, now known as Triangle West TPO. They were formerly known as the Durham Chapel Hill Carrboro MPO, or DCHC MPO, if you've ever heard of that. And we have been doing this since really since the early 2000s, when the two MPOs developed the plans on their own, but compared notes at the end right before adoption. They said, hey, that was a good idea. We made sure that we both had widenings on I-40, or we both had a train to go across the region, or bus lines, or whatever it is. Maybe we should do some more of that. So a couple years later, when we were developing the next update, known as the 2035 LRTP, that got adopted in 2009, the two MPOs developed it together and adopted. I think they actually adopted in the same month. Again, separate adoptions, separate boards, separate regions, but done together, because while the two MPOs are separate, the Triangle region is one big region, and so that's kind of why they do that. And that actually won a national award for outstanding achievement in planning. It was something that I think we tend to take for granted around here, is how well we've all worked together, especially in transportation. And when we do have disagreements, we tend to figure out ways to compromise. Surprise, surprise, that is not usual, right? When you look around the rest of the state, when you look around the rest of the country, working together is really hard. And I'd love for us to be able to take credit for it here at Campo, but the reality is we didn't create that. We just try to help maintain it. And it does span into other areas. It's not just transportation, whether it's water and sewer planning, parks and rec planning, economic development, whatever it is. Our region has figured out that we all do better together when we work together. But you don't have to go very far, even in North Carolina, to see that that is not the approach that a lot of other areas take. So it is something that we value highly, and we will continue to try and maintain and foster it. So what are the elements that we're working on together this time? We developed our goals, objectives, and performance measures together. I believe we have all the same goals again this time. We have mostly the same objectives. There's a few different wording, verbiage differences there. And we have many of the same performance measures. Some of those are still being developed. We may have very different targets, but we'll see how that goes over the next several months. We use the same forecasting tools. On the land use side of things, we use a combined regional model that's based on the CommunityViz software. And then on the transportation side, we use what is known as the Triangle Regional Model. Specifically, the Triangle Regional Model Generation 2 model is what we're using. It is a TransCAD-based model. For those of you that know what that is, that's just the software package that it runs on. We are developing our financial plans and assumptions together. That doesn't mean we have the exact same numbers, but we are trying to make the same assumptions. And that's honestly one of the more difficult things to come to agreement on, but it's something we are trying to do, and we have done in the past. We are developing our scenarios and our major milestones together, and trying to stay in unison on every step of the process. We have the same approach to dealing with Title VI requirements and the analysis that goes into that. We have a variety of projects and programs that again cross that MPO boundary, and we spend a lot of time coordinating to make sure that we have those in alignment with each other. And then ultimately, the writing of the actual report, that PDF document. You might have a Campo staff member who's writing the bicycle pedestrian mode section for the entire triangle, even talking about things happening, in Carborough. You might have somebody from the Triangle West TPO staff that's writing the section about the different scenarios that were developed. So from cycle to cycle, it really depends. Who's doing what. We try to assign who's available and who's the best to do each task, regardless of which MPO they work for. We also have a strong partnership with the Central Pines Regional Council, formerly TJCOG, for those of you who have been around for a while. They help with regional coordination. They help to make sure that the two MPOs stay on track with each other. They are also responsible for the maintaining the community biz land use modeling tool that we have. And they coordinate our regional transportation demand management program, which is an important part of our MTP. They help to make sure that the air quality conformity process happens on time and happens and meets all the requirements. And again, just helps a lot with coordination. Who else is involved? Well, all of you all, but more comprehensively, I guess, it's the public, it's elected officials, it's a variety of state and federal agencies, it's all the transit operators, it's the private sector. How many of you know what RTA is, Regional Transportation Alliance, and Joe Malazzo? They are very, very involved in transportation in our region, and they are very interested and work alongside us as we develop the MTP. So a lot of coordination goes on, and this is a good time to point out that for every one of our member jurisdictions, we have a staff member assigned to you to help coordinate this process. This is your first stop for any questions, any updates that you have for transportation projects, for land use changes, or if you're like, what the heck is going on? I don't understand something. This is your first stop. So head. I'll pick on you. I think you would have Daniel to contact if you had any questions for City of Raleigh. And you can see everyone else up there from our staff. If you don't know who one of these people are, just let us know during the break and we'll make sure you meet them and get to know them. And if you've been working with them, I hope you've found that process to be helpful. I know we've gotten a lot of good feedback from folks that it's great. I know when we are doing a presentation every month, like at the TCC, you're in a room with 40 or 50 people and you might feel like you have a small question, even if it isn't, and you don't want to take away from the meeting for that. First, I'll tell you, ask your question. If it's something we feel like is better suited to an offline conversation, we'll say, hey, here's the quick answer, but we'll get into that with you after the meeting if you'd like. But for those who don't want to do that, this is your resource. Contact these folks. You can contact myself, Bonnie, whoever it is, and we'll get you what you need. And again, you all, as our local government members, as the regional agencies that we work with, you are the MPO. We kind of always say, we are you and you are us. Which I know sounds kind of silly, but it is true. And it is a very important part of the process. So before we go any further, any questions about any of that material?
Yeah. Question about the budget. Now you mentioned that the costs and revenues have to balance. How is that budget determined, like year to year? The funds that are coming in, do they come in first and then the projects are selected, or how does that process work?
Great question. And we have a magic crystal ball that we keep in the back to do that. No, we're actually going to cover some of that a little bit later, but real quickly to answer your question, we work very closely with NCDOT on a couple of things. For the big projects that they're probably going to be the ones to implement, we work with them to understand cost estimates. So projects that are going to be happening in the next couple of years, you've got really good project level cost estimates. We copy, we paste, right? For things further out, we work with NCDOT to develop planning level tools. So general cost per mile, that sort of thing. In our area, that's a little challenging because of the cost of right of way. And then we also do some constantly changing thinking about inflation and that sort of stuff. For costs, for revenues, very high level. Again, we work with NCDOT to understand what the trends are for state and federal funding for our region. So what has been our slice of the pie, over time. Then we also work with local jurisdictions to understand what you've been doing from a trend perspective on, say, bonds or CIP funding, that sort of thing, and we collect all of that. And we do some reasonableness checks. So if I'll pick on Apex, if they said, we're gonna have $200 million worth of bonds in the next 10 years, and they've never done more than $30 million worth of bonds in a 10-year period, we're gonna ask a lot of questions, right? City of Raleigh, if they said, we're not gonna do any bonds and their trend was 150 million every 10 years, we're gonna ask a lot of questions to understand what's going on there. And then the other thing is working with you all to understand what you think, because you're the experts on this part, but what you think local development is going to do, right? Oh, a developer is going to widen that road, or they're going to build this road, or they're going to add this, this bridge or whatever it might be. And then we capture all that as well.
Thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Anybody online?
One real quick, is the Triangle West TPO on the same schedule as well for every 4 years?
Yes. Yes, so we both have deadlines in February 2026. And, I've been here at Campo for, this will be my fourth MTP update, I think, or 45, yeah, my fourth one. And so of those three that we've done so far, the furthest apart we've been is a month in adoption. Generally, we're off by a couple of weeks because of when the meetings fall. Now, throughout the process, we might get a little bit further off. It just depends. But generally, we're within a couple of months of each other and we're hitting the deadline.
And sorry, just one more real quick. Is there an actual federal review of the document at all?
Yep. Yeah. So there is a step. Now it'll be interesting to see how that happens this time, because in the last three updates we have Joe Geigley is our current liaison for federal highways, and he has always been, and his predecessor before him have always been very involved along the way and providing lots of good feedback along the way. So, it's not like we give them the document at the end and then they spend a long time reviewing it. They've been reviewing things the whole way and they understand where we're at. So it's pretty quick, right? But yes, it does get certified once we've adopted it. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, Bonnie, did you have something?
No, I was gonna say, I think it might make sense for me to start actually with the next slide.
Okay. You want me to just click it or you want this?
Will you click?
Sure.
Are you able?
Yeah. All right.
No, I was actually looking at Daniel, but,
Oh, yeah, Daniel, you can.
so, real quick, just to give Chris a break, our public engagement slides are just a couple away. I'll start off on this section. So Chris already described the general, 4 steps of the MTP update process. And, here in a moment, I'll talk a little more about how we engage, the community at each of these different phases. But the first thing we did want to just cover with you, I just advanced the slide as if I was advancing the slide, thank you, is we did want to share the mechanics of the goals and objectives just a little bit further. So Chris alluded to the big step of since this is just an MTP update in all technical terms, we look at we start to develop our goals and objectives, our performance measures based on what we used with the currently adopted MTP or during the last process. So we look at those existing goals. We look at the data we're getting from the performance measures. Is it actually useful? And we start to kind of work on whether or not our measures are, and ultimately our targets need to be updated. Are they in line with what we're seeing across the region when it comes to your local transportation plans, as we are referring to them? And then we take any staff recommended updated goals out to the community. And we present them to TCC Executive Board. If you would advance the slide. This year, in fact, it was a year ago now, so last year, Chris asked us to do a couple things, and Daniel was heavily involved with this. We did a skim of all of your local plans to see, do the MTP goals match up the goals that we had previously? And so we looked at all the comp or land use or transportation plans that were being updated. And as you can see, it looks like we were pretty much in line with most of those. So next slide. We also looked at goals in comparison to the studies that are outlined in our work plan each year, but to the studies we had recently conducted over the last few years. So that was everything from the 401 corridor study to a BRT extension study and so on. And so again, most of the goals and objectives all lined up pretty much fine. And we didn't see that there was anything super new. So we were like, okay, let's go ahead then and take this out. And when I say that, I mean out to the community. So for the joint MTP, we are branding it this go round for the 2055. The development of the 2055 MTP is known as Destination 2055. We have lots of bookmarks down here if anybody wants one. But for when you see this in the community, you'll see we have Destination 25 stamped on most of our products. In 2050, just FYI, if you look at the cover of that document, it was called Connect 2050. So we're Destination 2055. Our goals were, let's make everybody aware of what we're doing with an MTP, that it's an update process, and then ask the community for feedback on those goals. You guys are largely familiar with public engagement. It's common in this area, pop-ups, in-person events, and so on. Lots of summary information shared with our board. And then next slide, Daniel, lots of social media stuff. And ultimately, in November, the executive board adopted or approved the goals. And we put this in orange because it's really critical to understand the approval by the executive board is simply for us to continue using those goals in the development process. Ultimately, goals are adopted with the final plan, if that makes sense. Let us know if you have any questions on that. And so they were mostly the same. There were a few tweaks, literally one word here and there on a couple of our goals, but that's about it. And so we will quickly walk you through them because we really want to get to the next phases in the process and back to Chris. Go ahead, Daniel. All of this is online, by the way, and a little, sorry I didn't say this earlier, all the recording and will be shared with everybody as well as the slide deck and our TCC members as well. So I think we have 8 goals. We have protect the human and natural environment, minimize climate change. We have connect people and places, and underneath each of these, you can see the objectives that are associated with them. We are, as a staff group jointly with TWTPO and CPRC, are working on the targets and measures that go with these and possibly even still updating some of these objectives further. Next 2 goals. Promote and expand multimodal and affordable transportation choices, managing congestion and system reliability, improving our infrastructure condition and resilience. That's a big one. Remember, one of the emphasis areas for an MTP, according to our federal guidance, is that piece on making sure that you are maintaining things as they are, as well as looking to the future. Ensuring equity and participation is a goal. That also relates to our civil rights and our ADA things. They all kind of follow with that. Promoting safety, health, and well-being. Campo just is in the middle of the big blueprint for safety for the region, coming up with a safety plan. Some of that stuff will suck into the MTP. And they're helping with developing performance measures that will be used. But this also attaches to health. And then finally, stimulating economic vitality and opportunity. I love the Cary Fountain. So, but it's a nice idea of the downtown multimodal economic growth and whatever stimulation that can be provided. So I flew through that. We probably in the session later today, but could answer some high level questions if there are any on the goals, their development, anything like that. And we have huge spreadsheets of data behind all these things that we would be happy to dive into. Not today. All right, Mr. Lucasino, back to you.
All right. I want to go back just so you guys can kind of see what I was talking about earlier. So you can see for each, there's 2 goals on this slide here. But under each goal, there's several objectives. And then for each of those objectives, there's at least 1 performance measure. I think that's right. We don't have any anymore that are no performance measures, right?
Yeah, definitely at least 1.
Oh, we have, dang it. Okay. So most of our objectives have performance measures. But one of the challenges that we found is obviously the more objectives we could come up with, which everyone felt like were important things, some of the data is not readily available, or it's very expensive, or it's really hard to do. And so what we've done over the years is said, well, that just because something isn't, we don't have data for something doesn't mean it's not an objective that we should be trying to work towards. So rather than delete it, we kind of have it, and every couple of years we're looking at it again to say what has changed. Is there a better data source? Is it less expensive? Is it easier to do? Can we now scale this up to the regional level? Whatever it may be. Okay, moving on. And I'll note for everyone, we are about halfway through the slide deck, so we're cruising right along. But now we're going to get into this sort of next step in the process, analysis and evaluation, which is where we're at in our 2055 update process right now. So we'll dive right in. A couple of things we want to make sure you understand at the front end of this: socioeconomic data and the triangle regional model. So socioeconomic data for us means people and jobs. Right? The triangle regional model is ultimately the forecasting tool we use to look at that future transportation situation. We are able to model roadway, public transportation, and non-motorized trips. So it's a pretty comprehensive model. At least state of the practice nationally, if not, maybe a little beyond that. But this initial step that we have to do in our process of forecasting is to forecast the amount, the type, and the location of people and jobs throughout our time frame. So the first step in that is developing what we call our socioeconomic guide totals, and we generally do that at a county level. And because we realize that we are not the smartest people in the world, and we're happy to beg, borrow, or steal, we let the state demographer tell us what those are. So we take their data. And we look at it for our base year, which for this effort is 2020. And then we look at it for our plan year, 2055. Ultimately, we will have socioeconomic data forecast for all of our horizon years. So a horizon year is a decade, right? So we have a 2035, a 2045, and a 2055 horizon year. But the out year is the 2055 horizon year. We then take those state demographer numbers and a couple of other sources we use for employment data, and then we forecast that out through the region in very small zones that are called traffic analysis zones, and I'll kind of show you that in a few minutes. But that is how, at the very basic first level, first step of our technical process, we do that forecast of population and employment, and then everything builds off of that. So for our region, These numbers are draft, they get updated, and I think actually since I made this slide last month when we were supposed to have our training, I think we've gotten some refined numbers because the state demographer, if you've ever looked at the website from one month to the next, there's always a little change here, a little change there, because they're constantly looking at other data and revising their numbers. So these are the numbers that we have been using. But the final numbers, just like the goals and objectives, are not adopted until everything is adopted all at once. That's sort of how we go through our process. We have these interim checkpoints with the executive board, and they give us the thumbs up or okey dokey to continue on with those assumptions or with those decisions. And then their final decision on everything is made when they adopt the plan. So I think the big takeaway here is we're gonna get more than 1 million people and about 800,000 new jobs between now and 2055. That's a lot, right? You think about the population of Wake County, we're gonna basically get another whole set of people in our region that would equal what's currently in Wake County. That's a lot of growth. So,
It's just within the Campo part?
Yep.
Or, okay.
The beginning, so how do we do this? We do this with the end in mind, right? So we developed our base year. We've been creating what we think those future scenarios will be based on. So what are the key components of those scenarios? And that's what we'll use to allocate that future population and employment growth throughout the region. Oh, this is a GIF. I didn't realize that. Good. They swapped out the graphic on here for me last night, and
Last night, yeah.
I looked at it real quick on my phone this morning, and so I didn't get to see the animation there. But so what that's really showing you, and this is this the current? This is plans and trends, I think, or it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So this is not final data, so don't worry, but it's just showing you as an example kind of what that growth looks like over time. And every switch there you see in the graphic is one of those horizon years. So that's sort of base year, and then it grows over time to that full growth in 2055. And that's just a dot density map, so no, people aren't actually where the dots are, they're just representative. But the blue on that is population, the red on that is jobs. And ultimately, when we're done with our technical work, we'll have a final data set for socioeconomic data and growth at the TAZ level that will be adopted by the board. Okay. So we take those control totals, we use our community viz model. This is not an out-of-the-box community viz model. It has been customized to a very high level, high degree. But it's what we use to help understand where the growth capacities are for the different parts of the region. And then based on the decisions that have been made, primarily land use decisions, what that future growth might look like. It requires 5 basic inputs. So we need, what are those constraints on future development? That might be floodplain, it might be protected parkland, those sorts of things. It's also things like what's already developed, right? If something has developed and you're saying that's what's going to always be there, then obviously new development would never go there. We look at the type of place that each parcel will become. So not what it's today, what will it be in the future? That's your future land use. Now, those of you who have been working on this and have been actually providing the data to us or to Central Pines actually, you probably recognize that our what we call place types or future land use categories don't exactly line up necessarily with your local land use category, but we have, I think it's over 30 different place types or future land use categories out there that all have a pretty good gradient of types of land use. And then the other thing we're able to do is go in there and you can go in and customize your densities and a few other things unique to your community. So low density residential or medium density residential in Raleigh might be 30 or more units an acre. Am I pretty close on that? Hopefully. But in Fuquay Arena, it might only be 10 or 15 units an acre. So we can have that customization in the data, and we do have that in the data. Then we also need the current development status. So is that parcel developed and it won't ever change? Is it undeveloped, but it could change, or you think it will change? Is it developed to something today, but it could redevelop into something different in the future? Or is it something that's been developed, but there'll be more development that occurs on that, so it'll densify, right? You won't scrape off what's there and start new, but whatever's there, you'll build on it. Then we also look at land suitability. So things that influence how attractive different parcels are throughout the region. It might be proximity to an interchange for commercial development. Or it might be a future transit BRT station. Those are things that would attract growth. There's also some things that can have negative suitability too, like how close you are to certain constraints, right? That might lower your land suitability. And then the types and amount of growth that are going to be allocated. So our growth, our targets. So that's where we take those guide totals and put them in, right? So we know what our future population is supposed to be. We subtract out our current population. The delta there is the amount of growth that we're going to get, say, in Wake County. That's the number we put into community biz, and it goes and calculates based on the people per household and the number of jobs by our different job categories that we have in the model. And it goes and allocates those all out. And so the type of the place type that you have in your development status and that land suitability will all determine where all that growth goes in the region. So again, it's proximity to transportation investments, availability of sewer service, proximity to activity centers. And if a parcel is within a planned growth area versus not in a planned growth area, those are all things that affect that suitability. And this heat map you see on there, the more red or orange something is, the more suitable those areas are, the higher score they get on a scale of 100. The more blue you get, the less suitable they are for future growth. That's how this model works. So you can learn all you ever wanted to know about our community viz model by going to the URL on the screen there, centralpinesnc.gov. Under their mobility and transportation and urban mobility subsection, you can scroll all the way down and there's a whole bunch of stuff on community viz that is being updated and maintained. And you can even I think they're beginning to put in some of our alternative analysis scenario results as well, once we've said, yeah, they look good. So over the next 3 months, you'll see a lot more stuff added to it. If you looked at it today and you come back in a month, you'll have more stuff to look at. But what's up there now, they actually have some pretty good, easy to understand, anywhere from 3 to 5-page guides to help you understand some of the stuff I just covered in about 5 minutes and dive into it. And if you really want to dive into it, there's 100 and something page PDF on there that gets into a lot more detail if you're interested in that. Okay, so once we have the future population and jobs, we then take that and we import it into the Triangle Regional Model. This is a jointly managed forecasting tool. The partners that maintain this are the 2 MPOs, NCDOT, and on behalf of our transit agencies, Go Triangle. Although I think that might be changing in the near future, where Go Triangle may be taking a little bit of a step back, but all of our transit agencies are supporting that and using the results of that forecasting tool. It is a travel demand forecasting tool. It covers our region. And you can see it covers a very large area, and we've actually expanded that a little bit since the last map was done for this. And it now covers we're working to cover all of Johnston County with the new model that we're going to be using for the 2055 MTP. So it develops a forecast that represents travel in the area. It includes all the modes that we have in our area. It does not model flights out of RDU or out of the general aviation airports. I wish it did, but maybe some point in the future. I don't know. So in this model area, we have these things called TAZs, Transportation Analysis Zones. Think of those as sort of like zip codes specifically for transportation. Okay, so they are polygons, geographic units that we have created all throughout the region to help us forecast travel in the region. This is very important to understand, right? Because all trips start and end in a TAZ. Some trips stay in the same TAZ, stay in that same zone. Other trips go to the adjacent zones, and some trips go all the way across the region to another zone. It is just a subdivision of our overall region. We typically try to use census geography to create these zones. We also look to have some similarity within each zone so that you don't have some zone that's very, very diverse within it. So that's generally we look for similar land use. And then we also try to balance the number of people and jobs across these different zones, although sometimes that's a little difficult. So, one of the reasons why we try to align things with census geography is because we get a lot of good data from the census, from the American Community Survey, that we also use to help inform the model in addition to what the state demographer gives us. Any questions about TAZs as a concept and kind of what they are and why they're important? They're the building block of the entire regional model.
And how many are there?
We are, hey.
Slide.
Well, no, so there's about 3,000. I'm realizing I don't want to confuse folks, so we have an adopted model right now that is the official model of the region, right? And that is what our adopted MTP, the 2050 MTP, is based on. When we adopt our new MTP, our updated MTP, the 2055, we have a new model that we'll be adopting. That new model, as I mentioned earlier, has expanded the area that it covers, and there's more TAZs, which is why I hesitated to answer your question. I'm realizing that in trying to give you full disclosure, I'm probably confusing folks, and I apologize for that. There's about 3,000 TAZs in the model. The model helps us test across different modes what we think will happen in the future based on our growth and based on the transportation investment strategies and decisions that we make for the future. So we are on the tail end of what is known as the deficiency analysis, which is a milestone in our MTP development process. The deficiency analysis is a scenario that we create to help us set a baseline for all the other scenarios we're going to look at into the future. Does that make sense? It's sort of a control population, if you will. It is a measurement of a worst case scenario. So the basis for this scenario is we say, what if we had all the growth that we think we're going to get? All the new people come here, all the new jobs are created in the future, but we don't have any more transportation improvements made in that same time frame than what we already have today and what's already like committed for funding in the next few years, right? So what happens? And really what happens is, if you look on the right side or the left side of the screen, you can see that sort of like today, it's really 2020 forecast. And then on the right side of the screen, you see how things start to go from mostly green with a little bit of yellow to a lot more yellow and a lot of red showing up. These are what we call the tomato maps. We use them a lot in all of our scenarios. And it got that name because we used to have some forecasts where the deficiency and needs analysis would look like somebody took a tomato and threw it up on the wall. Everything was red, right? But think of these as like stoplights. Green means go, red means stop. If you see green on the map, that means traffic is flowing, sort of normally. If you see red on the map, it's probably an area that's got some congestion going on. I want to point out that when you look at these tomato maps, Red isn't always bad. For example, I'll keep using Apex. Downtown Apex on Salem Street, that's the main street through downtown Apex, the historic district, the commercial district. Having congestion there is probably a good thing, right? It means lots of people are down there, they're spending money, there's good economic activity happening, that's a good thing, right? Having red on a freeway section, in the middle of the day, that might be an issue we need to look at, right? Having red at an interchange where two big freeways meet during rush hour, that starts to get into a gray area. I know there's some folks around the table and online that might say that's okay. There's some folks who say, no way, we got to get rid of that red. How do we get the red out? That, by the way, was the question we were trying to answer for our executive board when we did that 2019 commuting corridor study. We showed them a deficiency and needs analysis, and then we showed them at the time the 2045 regional plan results, and they said, well, if we're going to make all this investment in the future, why is there still so much red on the map? And so we kind of had a conversation about that, and a question was asked by a former mayor of Raleigh, how do we get the red out? And I could sit there all day long in front of that group of elected officials and say, well, we're never going to get all the red out. But they needed to see it, which is why we did the commuting corridor study. And that really helped them several months later understand, like, oh, we're never going to get all the red out. Like, yes, that was a key teachable moment, I think, for folks to understand and for you all as well. Okay, back to the script now. Efficiency analysis. So our future year is 2055. We only looked at what we said were committed transportation projects, funded projects that would be, going by 2030. So a lot of growth, a lot more people, a lot more trips, not a lot of transportation investment in that future. This obviously is an unrealistic scenario because what would more likely happen is at some point, our congestion would be so bad that it would begin to affect quality of life. And then some of those people that we thought were going to come here maybe don't come here, right? It is useful though in helping set a baseline to then look at other future alternatives against. It helps us also determine where there might be deficiencies in the transportation network that maybe we didn't realize. Hey, why is there red over here on this corridor? Do we have a future project that might take care of that in the future? No, well, heck, we better go figure something out over there. Or, hey, there's red on I-40. Oh, look, we have a future widening that should take care of that in our plan. Again, it is useful, but it is very unrealistic and we understand that going into it. And it's not a scenario that we're ever saying, let's implement that in the future. Okay. Okay, so that's deficiency analysis. Sometimes we call it deficiency and needs analysis. Does everybody understand that basic first scenario? And are there any questions about it? And I see in the chat that Mike Bruff, one of our travel demand modelers, has corrected me. In our new model, there are 3,300 TAZs. So quite a few. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on then. Alternatives analysis. So this is where we spend a good bit of time looking at the future and looking at a variety of different scenarios for that future. It's a way that we explore how we might grow, where development might happen, and what our known or desired transportation investments of the future might do, what they might do for us, and where we might need to look at other transportation investments that maybe we've never talked about before. It's also how we look at what our future growth might be and then measure that against what our goals and objectives are for the future. So each scenario has two different things that are used to create it, what's called a development foundation and a mobility investment foundation. These two things put together create a scenario. And I'm going to run through all these for you. And I just want to point out this is not a quote on the screen there that I came up with. It is one that someone much smarter than I did, but it is absolutely true. Prediction is difficult, especially about the future. So we know we're going to get it wrong, right? But the great thing for you all is we put all of our cards on the table. We will show you anything and everything you want about how we came up with our number or our forecast or whatever it is. We'll give you everything, right? And if you've got a better idea, we want to hear it. As I said earlier, we love to beg, borrow, and steal. So if we're stepping through this or in the next several months, if you see something, you're like, hey, I think I have a better way to do that, we absolutely want to know about it. All right, let's dive in here. So you'll see this very same slide again in a few minutes, but each of the green boxes you see on the screen represent a scenario that we are actually testing for the 2055 MTP. And how many of you are sticking around this afternoon for the alternatives workshop? We're going to dive into some more detail on some of these this afternoon. So I'm going to stay very high level on this, right? Okay. So our development foundation, that's our land use that we use. Again, it's based on community viz inputs and outputs. And we do a community viz scenario for each of our MTP alternative scenarios. For this round, the 2055, we're doing 2 different community viz scenarios that are going to be matched up with those transportation investment scenarios as well. A couple of things to understand about that land use or development foundation side. We do focus on important trip origins and destinations. So where those important places that trips start from and where they're trying to go to. Those key hubs, those are things that we call anchor institutions and mainstays. And you can see up on the screen there some examples. So an anchor institution might be downtown Raleigh, downtown Durham, right? It might be NC State University or Duke University or UNC. It might be RTP. Some of the mainstays, so those are things that have some regional significance. They tend to be, places where jobs are concentrated, things like that. That might be some of our mid-size downtowns or important employment centers. So it might be some sort of business park that's out there, those sorts of things. Then our reinvest neighborhoods. And these are areas that have been designated based on a lot of the categories that are identified in Title VI. And that we, over the years, have said we need to pay particular attention to planning efforts made and decisions made that may impact those neighborhoods.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Real quick, how does community viz, does it make assumptions about annexations? Like my brother-in-law, I've got family that lives in Sheffield Manor. It's on Durant Road near Honeycutt. It's sandwiched between Falls of the Neuse and Six Forks Road. Those are 2-acre lots. They're outside the city limits, but they're right at the city limits. And does community viz make assumptions that by 2055, that area is going to be annexed into Raleigh, and those homes on 2-acre sites are going to be torn down and redeveloped with the zoning is going to change. They're going to be redeveloped more homes on. Does it make assumptions about that? Because they're kind of political.
So the short answer is yes, based on, in that example, probably Raleigh's comprehensive plan. So we take into account ETJs or growth areas, and every parcel in our model region. So let's just talk about Wake County to keep this sort of simple here. Every parcel in Wake County has an assigned local jurisdiction, even if it's not actually in their town limits. They've got planning jurisdiction, or in Wake County, they've come to an agreement on future growth areas and who has what future growth area. So we assign those areas to those communities, and they will tell us what the future land use is, what the future density might be, whether they think it is fully developed and will be not changed by 2055, or whether they think it's going to redevelop or what have you by that time frame. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So
That's
whether
on a parcel by parcel data.
it is
basis?
parcel by parcel, yes, sir. And in those areas where, in the rare instance that a local jurisdiction hasn't provided data, then we'll go through and make some assumptions about that. But in all of Campo, I think we have data from the local jurisdictions on everything. Yeah, and it's been updated over time. So So the 2040 MTP, which was developed back in 2010, was the first regional plan that we used CommunityVis for. So we've been using the same tool, updated and enhanced, and it has evolved, but we've got this track record now of 15 years of using this tool and working with local jurisdictions. So we actually have a pretty good process set up, and we're actually able to go back and track down, hey, why did, we end up at the end of this with a traffic forecast for a particular corridor. We can look at that and say, well, why did that forecast come out this way? And do we think it's right or wrong? No, we think that's not enough traffic. We can then backtrack through the system and see, oh, well, you didn't get any growth in the two TAZs next to it. And that's because it's all set as developed, meaning it's never going to get new growth. And then we can talk to the locals and say, is this what's really going to happen? Is this what we intended to happen? No, we need to change all that to redevelopable or underdeveloped or something. And then we'll rerun the model and it'll pop out, right? Now, I made that sound like it happens in the snap of a finger. It does not, right? It takes anywhere from a week and a half to 3 weeks to get from the beginning of a CommunityVis model to the end of a triangle regional model output. It is a big effort. I want to make sure we're really clear on that. So we want to try and get this right when we're doing these things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the other side of that matrix I showed you was the mobility investment foundations. This is the transportation network. What are those? What's the universe of projects that we're gonna pull from to create a network that we will test, right? So obviously we put all the existing stuff, all the existing roads and transit lines and all of that into that scenario, unless we're told that won't be there in the future. Sometimes roads do close. Sometimes transit lines do change, right? So we capture that. Then we go in and we look at what are those future projects that are desired and how they fit into the elements of each scenario. And we run the model, right? And what we end up with is a scenario that we can then test against a variety of different performance measures. And what's on the screen is not meant for you to read. It's just illustrative, right? But just to show you, we look at things in a variety of different ways. And then we also try to show it in some meaningful way, right? Some people like big tables in Excel with lots of numbers. Most people don't. So we actually spend a lot of time trying to find and I make Bonnie do it because she's smart when it comes to this stuff. But what are meaningful ways to help people kind of understand what the differences are in these different scenarios that we run? We then also look at the performance measures that we have, not just the ones that we want, but the ones that we're required to have. And when I say required, I mean federal law says we have to have certain performance measures, and then we have to set targets for those measures, and then we test against them. So all those different targets that you see up there, some of them are focused on looking backwards, not forwards, right? We unfortunately, there isn't really a good safety forecasting tool out there yet. There's a new research project that's going on nationally, and they're actually going to use our region, part of our region, and I think part of Asheville as guinea pigs to develop a safety forecasting tool. So I'm really hopeful that in the next couple of years, we might have a new tool that we can use. But when it comes to things like congestion, we can look at what's actually happened and then we can forecast with our tools and say, if we make this set of decisions, will it help with, say, congestion or mobility? Or if we make a different set of assumptions and decisions, how will those things be different? And I can tell you that generally you might have something that's very good for one performance measure, not so good for another performance measure, and it becomes a balancing act. So, Bonnie, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so there's just the one, I think this is the only slide for this one, but so I think we've sort of set the context for how the big steps of this process for developing the MTP goes. at the beginning, even before we did that goals and objectives engagement work, we came up with a big public engagement strategy. And I'm sorry, I meant to say that earlier. That's been shared with the executive board members through several different reports. And so if you're interested, we can get that to you as well. But then we did goals and objectives, and that was actually in very early 2024. So for community purposes, we keep saying, we've basically had our heads down and we've almost been underground digging, doing our work for almost a year now. The last, Chris said in November, we'll have sort of the final draft. And by February of next year, we've got to adopt this thing. We have 3 phases of engagement to conduct in about a 6-month period. So we go with this huge gap and then boom, here come alternatives. And not only that, this one's the most confusing. And you just saw, we can almost take none of that out for community engagement. It's too much, right? So we're spending the next month putting together materials on helping folks understand the knobs we're turning or the major trade-offs, the differences among these different scenarios, what's going into them, what Chris was just explaining, the mobility and development, you know what I'm saying, the 2 foundation types, and then what the outputs are for each of the alternative scenarios. And then what we'll be asking the community is, for a preferred, which of these things would you give preference to, and stuff like that. So you at your TCC and executive board meetings, likely in April, we'll see materials and we'll begin really pushing out on engagement for alternative scenarios. But when it comes to the goals, for all of the big 4 phases, we'll say, understanding the journey of the MTP development process is always going to be a major goal. Just bringing people along or helping them understand what this plan is and how it's developed at a very, very high level. And then trying to prep them and educate them about each of the scenarios so that they can give us some input. Because in the final 2 phases, when we have a preferred draft, people get very interested in the project list, specifically what's going into my backyard. And so that tends to be where a lot of engagement comes from. And at that point, we're really asking, did we get it right? And the turnaround is like a month. And then we have our big adoption document, which goes into the more formal processes of public comment and a public hearing. So we will be out throughout the month of May. I said all that stuff's under development now. We will really, really, really need your help. And we'll be doing lots of pop-ups and different things where we will reach out for pairing up together and on local events. But as far as what the things I'll present today, that's probably our biggest one, is in the next month or 2, we'll be doing alternatives. The last thing is, in the very short term, as each scenario is developed, our goal is to put some educational information out and start doing some email blasting and some social media messaging to kind of help people understand each scenario as we get results. So as they get presented by Chris at meetings, we're hoping to we're working on website updates, in fact, this week. We're hoping to start kind of pushing people toward the information with a tickler of, we'll be coming back in May with an actual survey. That makes sense? That's sort of our strategy, our plan for alternatives. That's it for now.
Yeah, I think one other thing just to point out about engagement, as I said earlier, the MTP is sort of a patchwork quilt of all the local plans and all these other planning efforts that have been going on over the last 4 years or longer. Each and every one of those had engagement, right? And had public comments. A lot of them had public hearings. So we also need to understand that all of that is part of that engagement record for our MTP. So it's not as simple as someone showing up to the public hearing for the MTP adoption and saying, I don't want that project. We're going to go back and say, well, what other feedback have we gotten about that project, and look at all that. So I just wanted to point that out, that there is sort of this, it's not a one-off thing. Again, it's sort of a living, breathing effort, and it does take into account the engagement that maybe you all received at your local level when you said this is a priority for our town. I hope that helps everybody understand how that kind of all fits together. All right, so questions about the deficiency and needs or alternatives analysis stages of the MTP development? Okay, just a quick check in the room. Does anybody need like maybe a 3 or 5 minute break? All right, let's go ahead and do that real quick. For those of you online, we will get back to it at 11:12.
By the way.
Hey all, everyone online, we're gonna get started here in just a minute. That worked. I think that was gonna work as well. All right. So, the next step in the process is getting to the preferred scenario or preferred option. And, this takes place after we're done with the alternatives analysis. It might be as simple as picking one of the alternatives. We like that one, that's our future. Okay, great. What happens more often than not is we like this scenario, but we also like that and that. And so we've got to create a hybrid, right? And once we've done that, we'll put that together, we'll rerun all of our tools and we'll have some results. That's when we have our preferred alternative. And then the next thing that we do is we begin to start narrowing things down and building towards that to that draft plan. So we got to sort through all these projects that we think are in our preferred scenario. We've got to load them in based, on our 10-year buckets, our horizon years. And to do that, we'll do an initial fiscal constraint, a very rough, high-level cut. So this go around, what we'll be doing is using what we call our payback period metric. So that looks at travel time savings, both a primary and secondary travel time savings for the different roadway projects especially. And it calculates what the payback period is for that investment. So if it's going to cost $25 million to widen a road from 2 to 4 lanes, let's say, the model will tell us what benefit we get to the mobility for that investment. We do the math and then we say, oh, well, that will take 7 months to pay itself back in travel time savings, right? Or it will take 2,000 years to pay that investment back in economic output and travel time savings. Does that make sense to everybody? It is admittedly very ham-handed, but it's a first cut. And so generally when we do that, we'll get results that range from 0.1 years or less for some improvement to pay itself back in terms of economic output, all the way to over 90,000 years for something to pay itself back. And so we'll go through and do a cut at a certain line. So for the 2050 MTP, it was about 3,000 years. So if something was going to take 3,000 years of daily traffic to pay for the investment, we cut. We said, you're definitely in the CTP. You're not in the running for fiscal constraint MTP. That makes sense to everybody? It was an arbitrary, we have nothing to say 3,000 is the line other than we said, where does it look like this is gonna be, right? And so that was the cut we used. That's kind of what we're doing this time. That is well beyond what we can afford and we'll have to cut even further, but we've got to start somewhere. Because in our region, we've got, for the CTP, we've got over 900 roadway projects alone. That doesn't even count transit projects. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of computing power to analyze things. So we do that rough cut and it narrows things down a little bit. And then we continue to do our analysis. Okay. The next step, and this is new for this time, once we get to that preferred scenario, is we're going to try to use our new roadway project prioritization tool. This is a tool that was created last year, and it measures and scores projects based on their performance across more than just congestion relief. So it does more than just travel time savings. It looks at congestion, it looks at improvements to connectivity, impact in the equity realm, cost benefit analysis, other economic and environmental impacts that a project might have. It looks at safety and reliability. It looks at how it improves multimodal transportation. And then we also look at bridge conditions because we've got a lot of bridges over the next 30 years that need to be replaced. And if you're going to replace a bridge, but you're also going to widen the road, you might as well replace it with a bigger bridge, right? So we try to identify that. Once we have that, we say that gets us about 85, 90% of the way there, right? In terms of fiscal constraint and prioritization. We then make adjustments. And this is an extremely critical step, right? So we then go out back to you all and we understand local priority. We might say, well, in our tool, project A scored better, so we're going to prioritize it and fund it first. But you come back and say, project B is really more important to us as a community. And if they're really close, we'll switch it. Does that make sense? If they're really far away, probably not going to switch it, right? But if it's kind of 6-1, we're going to defer to local priority on that sort of thing. On the more local level roads, whoever maintains them. So when I say local today, I don't mean who maintains the road. I mean what level in a sort of hierarchy of roads is it? So you might have the interstates and the major freeways, and then you've got the local roads. The more local the road, the more we're going to defer to local decision making. The higher level the road, the more we're going to look at it and say the region really needs to make that decision, not that local jurisdiction. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. You might disagree with that, but I just want to make sure everyone understands the concept. All right, good. So we look at that local priority. We also look at the positive and negative impacts of the project. So something might score really, really well because it has significant, a very high score for congestion, but it has huge environmental impacts. So a really low environmental score, we might say, well, we're gonna override the scoring in that regard. Where we override those technical numbers, we make sure it's very clear that that's what we're doing, right? We've got, I've talked about the universe of projects. That universe lives in a nice big database. And we have tracking in that database that tells us who touched a project, what they touched, how they touched it, and why they touched it, right? Did they edit it? Did they modify it? What happened? Which is kind of fun for us sometimes because I'm going to go way back in the distant past and I'll pick on Raleigh because it was Raleigh, but not the current staff, none of the current Raleigh staff. We did this by hand with paper maps. And we had a Raleigh staff member who walked into the first round. We had 3 rounds of meetings to go over those recommendations for different roads. And they said, okay, all these roads are wrong. These all need to go from, say, 2-lane or 3-lane roads to 4-lane median divided roads. We said, great, thank you very much. We had all these marked up maps. We made all the changes. We came back a few weeks later. They said, where are all these 4-lane roads? We want 3-lane roads with bike lanes. We said, okay, no problem. We'll go fix all that. Then we came back about a month later and presented and thought, we've got it. We're all done. And they said, where'd all the 4-lane roads go? And I said, are you the same person I've been talking to for the last 3 months? So at that point, we said, okay, we've got to do a better job of telling the story about how we got to where we're at. And that is an extreme example. And I'm still not sure that person wasn't messing with me along the way, but it was, I think, a very good example of why we have this sort of audit log. And the other thing is to make sure if we make a mistake that we understand it, right? And we can fix it and account for it very quickly. Edits are in our system. We do have versioning control and we have approval levels. So if Bonnie, for some reason, tried to go into that database and make an edit, somebody else who actually has an approval authority has to approve that edit before it's locked in, right? By the way, Bonnie doesn't get to edit the database. She doesn't even have access to it. So we do have some level of control on that, and it's to make sure we're managing that and we take it very seriously. So I want to make sure you all understand that and hopefully have confidence in that. And then we also look at community feedback, again, from the alternatives analysis or in the preferred scenario. And sometimes we're making changes literally right up until the executive board meeting when they adopt the plan. We do have a 2-step adoption process, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Once they take the first adoption step, we really are locked in and we're really doing all that federal certification stuff before they do the final adoption. So when they do that first adoption step, you'll know it. And that's when we aren't going to return phone calls for any changes after that. We'll get to the next go around. All right. So the prioritization tool, this is new to us. So if you have lots of questions about this, I may not be able to answer all of them. I haven't personally run this tool, but I've looked at results. We've had a very large living, breathing document about how it works and all down to the level of formula that's running in the background on how it all works. It is very robust. It is trying to incorporate national best practices in how we evaluate our projects and go beyond just travel time savings. We've always wanted to do that. And in the past, one of the other biggies I've always wanted to incorporate is safety. The best we could do up until this tool, it took anywhere from 2 to 4 hours per project to calculate safety benefits and then monetize that in the same way that we're doing travel time savings. When you have 900 projects, we did the math and it would take about 6 months to do that. And during that 6-month time frame, if we have one change to one project, it adds that. So it's almost an impossible way to do it, which is why we haven't done that in the past. But it's not for lack of trying or a lack of desire to incorporate all of those other elements. And now we've got a tool that can scale to our regional size and do it. And all the testing has been very, very promising. So we're looking to use that this go around. So just want to give you one example here, looking at calculating multimodal effectiveness. So it uses the walk and bike scores from walkscore.com and projected land use to estimate the need for improving the bike ped network out there. And then we look at each project and how much we think it might address those needs. So any project with an existing transit route will have a project travel time savings multiplied by the number of transit routes along that project. And that's how we score, transit benefit based on those transit riders. And then you can kind of see down the bottom that example where you've got 2 different projects. So for those of you who ever look at our MTP data and you click on a project or you look at the project list, we have a numbering system. While it looks complicated, it's actually pretty simple. F is for freeway, A is for arterial, anything that's not a freeway, and then we have numbers. Most of those numbers you're going to see, if it's just a standard number like A49 or A218, that's probably in Wake County because Campo for a very long time didn't expand outside of Wake County until 2005. If you're in one of the other counties, you've got a little designator for that county. So Franklin is Franklin, or Gran is Granville, and then a number, right? And they're numbered in the order that we've entered them into our system. So they're not numbered like all the 100s aren't interstates or something. It's just whatever order they were entered into over time. So if you're really a big history buff, you can probably go into our database and look and understand how long a project has been in there based on its number. If it's like A49 Pool Road, it's been in there a while, right? If it's A800, it's pretty new. Make sense? Okay. The little letters behind it mean that at some point that was a bigger project that we segmented into smaller pieces. So A218 might have been, I'm going to make this up, it might have been a 4-mile long widening project that over time we said, well, this is not all going to be built all at once. So it's been divided up into at least three pieces, an A, a B, and a C. And in this example, you see A218C. So that's that third piece of that larger corridor. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right, so let's talk about horizon years now. Horizon years, these are our 10-year buckets that we use for the MTP. A project goes in a bucket. That's how we put it into the MTP. And on our maps, they're represented by different colors. This is an online version, and I think it's actually looking at project type. But on our website, if you can go on to the actual static PDF maps, or you can go into our ArcGIS online mapping tool, and you can see those horizon years. Green is that first decade. Yellowish orange is that second decade. Blue is the third decade. Thinner gray is the CTP beyond 30-year horizon year. Okay. And so that's an easy way to quickly understand where a project lands in terms of the MTP and the buckets. I will tell you absolutely that we tend to have to put things in the second or third bucket more because we can't afford them in the first or second bucket than because they don't score well in terms of congestion or safety or something like that. We run out of money much faster than we run out of good projects. Does that make sense to everybody? Good. Bonnie?
real quick. We just mentioned this a minute ago, so when it gets to the preferred alternative, it's the, did we get it right? Sort of a faster turnaround comment form. Lots of comments on specific projects, during this phase and during adoption, and that's pretty much it for engagement. At that point, it will still be a full communications push though, so. Thank you.
Okay. So now, fiscal constraint and financial planning. Here we go. So to build the MTP financial forecast and do our fiscal constraint, we take our projected revenues over the next 30 or so years. We take all of our projected project costs, we put those together and we get fiscal constraint. It's that easy, right? It's balancing the checkbook. How many of you in here or online, raise your hand, have actually physically balanced a checkbook before? This is how we can tell how old everybody is, I guess, right? Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. My parents are a little older. I called to check in, talked to my mom, hadn't talked to her in about a week or two. Shame on me. I said, hey, what are you up to? And she said, I'm balancing the checkbook. I said, can you FaceTime me real quick? And she was literally sitting there balancing her checkbook. And she said, why don't you do that? I said, well, not really anymore. I just use the printout from online now. And I don't think she's ever gonna go that route, but yeah, anyway. So how do we balance our checkbook? Well, it's a little more complicated than your personal checking and savings, and do you have direct deposit? For us, the way transportation funding works, some funding categories are limited in what they can be used for. So there's a lot of different funding sources out there. It's not just as simple as state funding, federal funding. Federal funding, there's lots of different types and flavors and colors of federal money. Same thing for state, although there's less categories in the state side of things. So toll funding, state transportation funding, transit funding, wake transit funding, federal transit funding versus local transit funding, local CIP dollars, local bond dollars, discretionary federal funding or formula federal funding. There's all kinds of funding sources out there. Each one has its own unique set of rules and funding levels and limitations that we have to account for when we put all this together. Some funding categories are accounted for prior to selecting projects. For example, operations and maintenance, we take a cut of our revenue off the top for our plan. Historically, that's been 1/3 of the money. This go around, it will probably be higher than that. We are trying to begin to recognize in our planning efforts and in our financial plan that we are a high growth state, but in the next 30 years, we may stay high growth, but we will absolutely begin to transition to a maintaining state rather than just a building state, right? And more, we're having to replace bridges and rebuild interstates, right? 440, western side of Raleigh, that's a great example. I-40 slowly through southern Raleigh and central Wake County, rebuilding all of that. That's a great example. So we take a cut off the top for that and put it over there for those efforts. And again, illustrative, this is from the 2045 MTP. I haven't changed it over the years because in this slide deck, it's just meant to, don't look at the actual numbers. It's just meant to show you that there's a variety of categories that we have to put the revenue across. Okay. Some funding is already decided, so we've got funded committed projects in the current TIP that are going to continue to move forward. We got to take that money out of our revenue forecast, and it's already assigned to a project, right? We also have a category for development. So again, we listen to you all. You're going to tell us this road's going to be built by a developer. So we're going to go and say, okay, if that road costs $10 million, then we have at least $10 million in developer funds that are going to go into the transportation network. But that's sort of a project in, project out kind of endeavor, right? We don't assume a project is developer funded unless we've got confirmation that you think a developer is going to do that improvement over the next 30 years.
So Campo is applying for most of these funds here. Like you guys are the main applicant and like in conjunction with other municipalities?
So most of this funding is not grant funding.
Okay.
Most of this funding is formula funding, and so a lot of this funding actually goes through statewide prioritization or the STI process here in North Carolina. Some of it goes through our LAP, our locally administered projects program process. So those are competitive processes where for LAP, you all are submitting projects, but for the STI process, Campos submits all those projects on behalf of the region. We are second only to the MPO in the Charlotte region for the number of submittals that we can put into the prioritization process each cycle. Currently, we're at 40, I think we're at 47 this go around. Again, which is the second most in the state. And other than roadway, we tend to not have a problem making sure we have a good set of things to submit. The problem with roadway is we've got more needs than we can submit each round. All right, so give you a flavor of the type of revenue and project expenditure assumptions that we make in the MTP. Say for roadway projects, we will use NCDOT's revenue forecasting model for gas taxes and other fees like your registration fee that you pay each year. We'll look at annual inflation factors, both for cost of projects and for revenue that's being forecasted out. We work with the Turnpike Authority on getting a good estimate on toll revenue and toll expenditures. And then if there's any gap funding needed for future projects. And then again, we coordinate with you all on the local and private funding side of things for roadway projects. So that's on the revenue side. On the for transit, we also we will look at the trend for federal and state funding and local funding for public transportation. Specifically in Wake County, we will use the Wake Transit Financial Model. We don't necessarily, in years past, we have sometimes adjusted the assumptions in there for the longer term. And when they have been maybe a little more conservative from time to time on their revenue forecast, we've been a little more optimistic. And also we've done it one time the other way where they were assuming, I think, 4 or 4.5% annual growth. And we assumed 3.5% because we felt like that was during the recession or the end of the recession. So we wanted to be a little more conservative. But we will use that tool to help us create the revenue side for transit projects. We also look at fare box recovery when there is some. The last several years, we've had zero fare transit. They're transitioning out of that, so we'll begin to account for that as well. On the expenditure side, the cost side, we generally stick to NCDOT's cost estimation tools and numbers. They may be wrong, but we'll all be wrong together. And if that's what we're using to kind of input what goes into statewide prioritization, we want to be consistent with that. We have built a cost calculator tool based on those DOT inputs, and we'll use that if we don't have something better. Want to be really clear here, if we have a project-specific cost estimate, we will use that every single time, right? If it's 10 years old, we will not use it, right? But if you've got a project and you think, okay, this is going to be something we're going to be doing in the next 5 years, we just completed design or we're nearly complete with design, and we've got an engineer's estimate, we're going to take that number, okay? That's the best number out there. Again, for toll projects, we work with the Turnpike Authority and their financial estimation for those projects, but there's very few number of those, so it's very project specific. We then will also look to project sponsors again that have local specific project cost estimates. So our forecast, the first decade is primarily what's in the adopted TIP. Right? The way we've set up our MTP development cycle, as I said, we update this once every 4 years. And every 2 years, we're creating a new and updating a new TIP. So every other TIP cycle, it aligns with an MTP update, right? So we make sure those are in alignment. The cycle in between, every once in a while, we have to do an MTP amendment because things have shifted in the TIP. But generally, that first decade is what's in the TIP. In addition to that, we add in the local projects and the developer projects. For the second and third decades, we are taking what we have forecasted as our traditional revenue. So think of that as like state and federal funds. And then, and a lot of that is derived from that financial forecast from NCDOT. And then we will use that and apply that based on that prioritization of projects to fund the different projects. For transit, again, we're using that Wake Transit Plan forecast. Sometimes we have to extend it to a further out year. Sometimes we modify it a little bit. Generally, we're very, very consistent with it. And then again, the local revenue that we get from you all and development activity. And then that's not enough money, right? That's how it lands. So the last several MTP cycles, we have also made reasonable assumptions about new revenue sources to account for some of that funding gap that we see. We still can't fund everything with that, but it is more revenue and it makes it more reasonable for what we think we could do. 10 years ago, we were doing this on the transit side as well. We did not have Wake Transit funding 10 years ago, right? We were talking about it at that point, but we didn't have it. We made those assumptions for transit back then. We did it for roadway as well, but over the last 10 years, that referendum happened, it was successful, that funding source came to be. So we do look at potential new revenue sources that don't exist today, but are reasonable to think about for the future. And in our plan, we don't actually identify what it is. We've taken a very conservative approach. We develop a certain amount of new revenue, and then we will go and test it against 2 or 3 or 4 different source options. It might be a sales tax, it might be property tax, it might be a VMT fee in the future or a user fee in the future. And we demonstrate for the feds that we can accomplish that with any of those options. We also generally don't show that in the first decade. We always say if that's going to happen, it's going to happen in the second and third decades, not the first decade. Okay, so we get our preliminary financial forecast with all of those things. Again, we start with the traditional funding, state, federal funding, local funding, but not new revenue. And then we break it out. And in particular, with the non-local funding, we have to break it out through the existing statewide prioritization law that's on the books in North Carolina. So that divides funding really into 3 categories: statewide mobility, regional impact, division needs funding. You can see the O&M as operations and maintenance on that slide. Again, we take that off the top and we assign it over to where it needs to be. And then CMAQ, which is congestion management and air quality, federal funding, it is exempt under STI law, so it's treated separately. But it's a very small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. So we will have different scenarios here for funding levels. So from the 2050 MTP, our moderate scenario, we had we assumed that federal revenues would grow based on the current federal law in place at the time, known as the FAST Act. And then we made regular adjustments to the gas tax rate based on CPI data. North Carolina, we used to have a gas tax law that adjusted the gas tax based on the economic situation. They've limited that and capped it. And that changes from time to time, but we try and track that as well. Then in our more aspirational scenario, we had everything we had in that moderate scenario, but then we assumed that state and federal revenues might grow a little bit faster than the FAST Act said they would. And as it turns out, what is now known as IIJA or BIL did do that. There was more money out there than what used to be there. So this is also the financial scenario where we might assume additional, generally local option revenue. So when we then compare our revenue to our project costs, and you can see in this slide, which for those of you on the TCC or executive board, you will see a very similar slide in a few months. We will show you this based on these 3 categories of funding, right? Statewide mobility, regional impact, division needs. Statewide mobility, let's just talk about roadway for a moment. Those are things like the interstates or US highways, except for US 401. Don't get me started on that. Regional impact, that would be all the NC shielded highways. So NC 55, NC 98, NC 39, something like that, and US 401. And then division needs, those are all of the non-shielded roads out there, either maintained by DOT or not, out there. And then for different modes, no transit in statewide mobility, a little bit of transit in regional, most of the transit falls in division needs. Bike ped, all division needs. Okay, that's how that sort of very high level, very quickly, that's how that sort of works. And you can see when we do this, that traditional or STI revenue, we do not tend to have a problem with funding all of our statewide mobility eligible corridors or our regional impact eligible corridors. We tend to have a problem in the division needs. So the red bars on here, you can see with traditional funding in the regional impact, we needed a bit more money than what we had, even in the aspirational, and in the division needs, we needed a lot more money than what we had, even in the aspirational. And so that's where we said, okay, if we assume additional revenue, we can take some of that red, we can catch up to some of that red bar, right? So that's the conversation that'll be happening late summer, early fall, later this year. Because I can tell you right now, that's what the chart's gonna look like. We just know from what we've seen so far. So in our new additional revenue assumptions, some of the things that we will look at and test are, what if we replace the current gas tax system with the user pay system? What if we kept the gas tax, but we also had a user pay, a new user fee or an additional registration fee or something like that? We'll then look at a few other things. We've looked at sales tax based revenue. We've looked at property tax based, other user fees. And then we've thought about what the different levels could mean and what the rules could be. If you do a sales tax based thing, that's generally collected at the county level. So in Wake County, there'll be a lot of it. In Harnett County, not so much, right? And so how would we make that work in a regional assumption about the future? So we've got to think through that a little bit. We don't have to make final decisions in the MTP, but we've got to think through how that would work because it determines how much money we would have to play with in the scenario. Does that make sense to everybody? And again, any new assumption we make, it has to pass that federal reasonableness check. We can't just say we're going to have maglev trains running everywhere because we want them. We've got to show that we can afford that. And just like that example on the revenue side, we have a track record in North Carolina and in this region of successfully implementing local option revenue sources, whether they're property tax based or sales tax based or fee based. And so, that tends to be the direction that we head in the MTP, but including it in the MTP does not say it absolutely will happen. And it certainly isn't a vote to put a referendum out there to the voters or anything like that. So I want to make that really clear too. Okay, so these new revenue assumptions, again, we've made a variety of different assumptions over the years, and this is just a quick listing of that. Half-cent sales tax for transit, half-cent sales tax equivalents for road, even up to a full cent for road as well. And when we do something like that, it tends to definitely move the needle on being able to afford the projects that we say are important to our region. Wake County, for example, a half-cent sales tax equivalent, whether it's actually a sales tax or not, something that equates to that, is about 120 to 140 million a year. A full cent is over 200 million a year. So it is a serious amount of revenue that could be used to fill in the gap. Just want to go back to this real quick because this really does help illustrate for anyone who doesn't know this yet. Traditional state and federal funding is not enough to meet our needs or anybody's needs in the state. Right? The biggest problem we have when it comes to transportation in our region and in our state is not understanding what the problem is, the transportation problem is, or coming up with a good solution, right? Whether it's congestion, whether it's safety, we either already know what we need to do, or we can very quickly figure that out from an engineering perspective. The problem we perennially have is not nearly enough money. And it's very difficult, you have the legislature a few years ago that transferred transportation related sales tax to transportation, which after they phased it in, resulted in $600 million more a year going into transportation. And we should celebrate that, like that's really important. But at the exact same time, project costs have gone up double or even triple, right? So this latest round of prioritization at the state level, so taking our projects from the MTP and putting them, trying to get them into the TIP, there was $33 billion projected in revenue for the state, the entire state, across all three of these categories. There were $144 billion worth of funding requests, and that is limited. We could only submit 45 roadway projects. We have far more roadway project needs right now today than 45. So the true number is probably well north of $200 billion in need over the next 10 years, let alone 30 years throughout the entire state, but only $33 billion available. So that really is why when we develop our regional plan, we talk about other assumptions for future revenue. And to compound that, the way the funding works, and we have another training workshop that we do from time to time on how the TIP is developed and prioritization and all of that. But that division needs category is where the least amount of money is available for projects, and it's where all of the local roads, secondary roads, the towns, the roads that are really important to your local communities, that's where they live, right? They can't get the regional money or the statewide money. So that's why it's so important to understand that. Okay, again, back on track. So in the 2050 MTP, when we looked at our new regional or local revenue assumptions, we looked at a variety of different alternatives. We looked at a half cent or a full cent, based on each county, and the portion of the county. So we didn't count all of Johnston County. We only counted the Campo portion and kind of had to come up with a way of figuring out how much money that might be. And then we tried to use, like we do with many things, a modal or an investment mix, just like your 401k. If we had this new revenue, how would we want to spend it? Do we want it all to go to roads, all to go to bike ped? How do we want that spent? And so you can see just these again as examples, how we looked at this, and I believe we ended up with alternative 3 and slightly modified, is what we ended up using in the final MTP. But it makes a difference, right, in what we're trying to do. So what's changed for this go around? At the federal level, we have currently the IIJA authorization. It expires next fall, so fall of 2026. All indications are that Congress is going to try and have whatever is going to replace it, which is generally a 5-year bill, released this summer. So we might be scrambling very quickly at the end of our MTP update cycle with new financial assumptions. But also all indications are that transportation is one of the areas where they seem to want to spend more money at the federal level. So we'll see how all that works out. It's a little crazy up there right now. And we're trying to sift through everything we hear for what makes sense for us to assume. At the state level, STI and that process, again, the biggest issue is funding availability. We've got plenty of really good projects. If you compare any of our projects to any other project in the state, we score very, very well every single time. There's just not enough money. And at the local or regional level, we continue to update and advance the Wake Transit effort in Wake County. Local funding is evolving. Generally speaking, a lot of our local jurisdictions are beginning to realize they have to step up, at least to some degree, and sort of take your future into your own hands, whether it's with requiring developers to do more, partnering with developers to do more, or creating more robust bond programs and local CIPs. Doing so has been very fruitful for a lot of local jurisdictions in Campo. Our LAP program and leveraging those local dollars with the direct federal dollars that we get for our region has also been very helpful, and I think that'll probably continue. So a good list of continuing challenges, but the number one thing to point to is, again, the local and regional revenue options are something that I think we're going to continue to be either quietly forced to or pushed to consider. Because again, those federal, I don't think it's reasonable to assume that federal or state funding is going to quadruple anytime soon, which is what we'd be talking about, right? It may increase, but it's not going to increase by that much. And costs continue to go up. Inflation continues to happen. And if we want to get these improvements that we know are needed, we're going to need to continue to look at other ways to implement them. And that includes other funding sources. So after all of that, we have a final plan, right? It goes forward for adoption. So we have a two-step process. The first initial step will be to adopt the projects and programs that are in the plan. And then we will go through that sort of federal certification process and our air quality conformity process. That generally takes about 2.5 to 3 months. So right now, our board is scheduled to consider initial adoption in November of 2025. 2 of the last 3 times that got pushed to December. And that really bumped us up against that deadline. So we really need to work hard together to get a draft plan that is acceptable to the board really in October, because there's a public comment period and a public hearing and all of that stuff. So that in November, they can take action. We have one fallback date, and that's December. So we really try to save that in case we need it. And thankfully, this last time we didn't need it, but the 2 times before that we did. We had to push into December and have a meeting and adopt that. The air quality conformity process, again, is something that we are required to comply with. We are generally trying to demonstrate that ozone causing pollution from all of our planned projects will stay within the budget that has been established for our state and our region. And we've been well within it the last couple of times, and we expect that we'll continue to stay within it. And then once that's happened, the board comes back together at usually their February meeting and does their final adoption. And then it is done. We wrap it up with a nice pretty bow and put it on the website. So Bonnie, this is you.
And so for both of these adoption processes, we just do your more formal public comment and engagement, public comment and public hearing opportunities. We do push information out about the final plan, but at that point, it's pretty hard to change things. And so we're really trying to focus folks on engaging during the alternatives period at this point and catching us if we miss something. But you can see there's quite a lot of review that goes into that final plan.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. So once we have adopted our major update to the MTP, there's always going to be changes that need to happen. Somebody's going to adopt a new local transportation plan the week after we adopt the MTP, and we have ways to deal with that. They really fall into 2 categories: technical corrections or amendments. An amendment is something that does require going to the board for adoption. There's going to be a public hearing. There's going to be a public comment period. We're going to have to do air quality conformity. These are not things that happen overnight. It takes time, and it's a big deal. So we do try to limit the amendments to either when we're doing one of these once every 4-year updates, or every 2 years we do an update to account for changes in the TIP. Those are great times to get any of those amendments, taken care of. If there is a need for an amendment in between those 2 opportunities, it is something we can do. But again, it is not as simple as amending your local comprehensive plan and you decide to do it and next month you can do it. This takes a lot more time and a lot more effort to make it happen. Make sense? Okay. Technical corrections, these are minor things. So it might be that we had the cost wrong. We can update the cost. It might be that we thought, it was going to be one flavor of federal funding and it's another. We can go ahead and make those changes at the staff level. It doesn't require public review or comment or anything like that. Make sense to everybody? And here's the schedule for the 2055. and the laser pointer doesn't work on the screen. We got these, when we moved in here 2 years ago, it was like, hey, we got great tech, and then our laser pointers don't work on the screen. So we are right in between the first and second lines. We're actually, surprisingly, and I hate to say this because it's gonna jinx it, but we are a little bit ahead of schedule. We have begun the alternatives analysis scenario runs. So I'm very happy about that. Usually we're behind and we're pushing schedule. But this time I made a promise to Alex and a lot of our tech folks that I was going to hoard any of our buffer time in our schedule until we absolutely needed it. Instead of using it at, early on and then saying, oh no, we're running out of time and now we have to rush through everything. We have to rush anyway, but really trying to make sure that we stay on schedule and don't have to push very much. So we are on schedule right now. Our plan is still currently to have hopefully a recommended preferred alternative by the June executive board meeting. And then be able to come back in August or September with draft fiscal constraint. So that is an overview of the MTP. What questions do you guys have?
I think I should clap, like at the.
Save that for November, right? Save that for November. So questions, comments, anything? Yeah.
Do you all work with a consulting firm in doing this process, or is it all the,
So the MTP itself is done internally. A lot of the studies that go into the MTP are done with consultant assistants. So when we do the Northeast area study or the Southeast area study, we have a consultant team that we work with on that. But when it comes to doing the actual MTP and the alternatives analysis and all the modeling and all of that, that's done internal. Yes.
It's an accountability thing too. Like half I've seen of MPOs do hire consultants and they do nice glossy types of things, but this way we have full control over all time.
So I may not understand the overall how MPO can play a role in the regional revenue options. Again, Wake County had the transit sales tax. There's a tax administration that actually administers that portion of it. If something is needed for complete streets or other transportation types of projects, would that be a county-led initiative or decision at that point? Or would it be led by the MPO and all the other counties would have to kind of sign off on it? And because I think you talked about how the portions of each county
Yeah.
that it extends into would have to play a role as well.
So we think through either option, right? County-based, regional-based. There's examples of both out there, especially in other states. Campo itself today, I don't know if Lisa Blackburn, our finance director, is on the call or not. If she is probably screaming at her screen right now. She thinks I'm going to say something, but I'm not. We would need to staff up if we were going to become the tax district.
Okay.
I don't know that that's the right answer. I think that we've learned a lot from the Wake Transit process and program. And I think that our expertise is in planning and coordinating and priority decisions and making those decisions collectively. And that's probably what our role would be. But you could imagine if you had more than one county that decided to do a general transportation sales tax. Just think about, let's say, Wake and Johnston County, for example. We have a lot of roads that cross that, right? Lots of transit in the future that's going to cross that. That needs to be coordinated, that needs to be planned out together. So, the more that time is going on with Wake Transit, the more I would see a potential option would be, and we do have a Wake County commissioner in here, so I'll pick on Wake County. Wake County decides to do a referendum on general transportation because they're allowed to by the General Assembly. So they do that. And let's say Johnston County decides to do it too. Well, having a 10-year plan that governs how that money is spent, that is updated every few years in coordination with the MTP, because a lot of it's going to use federal and state funding. A lot of those projects are going to be regionally significant, so they're going to have to be coordinated with that. And then also having that annual budgeting process that has to be coordinated, I think makes a lot of sense. Taking those funds and then providing them to local jurisdictions or NCDOT on the behalf of local jurisdictions really seems to make a lot of sense on how the mechanics of how that might work. That's just an idea, right? The Charlotte region is looking at doing this now. They have a draft bill that's been put together. It is not set up the way I just described it. Reading their bill has led me to think that this is probably a better way to do it. They are creating essentially one tax district
Okay.
that would also be the same tax district for their transit money.
Interesting.
They're taking the tax district they have now under this bill. It would enlarge it, expand it, and then create a board that would actually have representatives appointed by the governor and the Senate and the House in addition to local. And it just seems like that, I mean, obviously that's a way that we could go with that. But it seems like, one of the things that counties are really good at is collecting money and distributing money. They're not in the transportation business, right? Raleigh is, Garner is, right? So let us do the planning and that coordinating, let them cut the checks, and you guys go build the stuff. That seems to be something that would make sense. Everybody does what they're good at, right? Does that make sense? Okay. We're not there yet, but that is the front runner for new revenue and discussions, and there have been discussions in our region about potentially pursuing that with the legislature at some point. And that seems to be sort of the front runner on how that might work.
So after the plan is adopted, is there a sort of planned roadshow that you go, like what's the steps of implementing the plan after even with, specific jurisdiction or specific projects? How closely do you keep in contact or work with jurisdictions and organizations for the specific plans or projects within the plan?
Yeah, great question. So, regular coordination with local jurisdictions, first and foremost through the TCC and the executive board, but also through regular outreach. We do, again, a variety of special studies. So in any 4-year time span, we might be doing 2 of those big area studies, like the Southwest and the Southeast area study, as well as corridor studies and other things where we're able to check in and see how things are going. At least once every 4 years, we're updating what the existing road network looks like and what future projects are gonna look like. So we're able to capture when things are open, right? When did they get done? Let's check them off the list. For the larger stuff, statewide prioritization happens every other year. And so, we're leading that effort for our region to do all those things. And then working with NCDOT on the implementation side, all the way through project development until the project is not just turning dirt, but open. Other questions? Anybody online? All right, well, we are 25 minutes early, I think, and we set a new record. A couple of comments here from Stephen Morgan. Really like to focus on safety with modeling. That should be a priority with the project. And scenarios should incorporate ways to mitigate safety concerns, particularly vulnerable road users. Yes. So one of the things we're doing right now is a regional safety plan. And we're really hoping, and the schedule for that was designed to be able to inform projects and programs in this 2055 MTP update. As long as we stay on schedule, that'll all line up. So we're really hoping that we'll be able to take a lot of good output and recommendations from that effort that's been going on over the last year and use it in our 2055 MTP. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for attending and participating along the way from here until, well, forever. If you have questions or comments or ideas, please don't hesitate. Reach out to us. And if you need a presentation or you feel like your board might want this on a work session or a regular agenda or whatever it is, we're happy to do it. We've participated in local jurisdictional retreats, work sessions, full board meetings, whatever it is. We're out to the Rotary every once in a while, local, community events, all of that stuff, to educate and have some outreach there as well. So, thank you very much for everyone who attended. Thanks to Daniel and Bonnie who were instrumental in getting all this put together. as well as other staff. And if you're sticking around this afternoon, I think we're getting started around 1:30. Lots of opportunities here at Fenton to go and grab some lunch if that's what you want to do. Other places down the street as well. But we'll see you all back at 1:30 if you're sticking around. If not, thanks very much for your time. And we'll see you at some point in the future.
Stay tuned to your email. You'll be getting one from me with the slides and the recording.